Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel,
good morning,
to see you.
Oh, hi.
Well, very good. I want to talk a little bit today about an article you put up just recently, yesterday or so, dealing with an anniversary. And it's a very important article. It's an anniversary 13 years ago of something that happened 13 years ago. Of course, the title is rather catchy. And it's an anniversary of the biggest terrorist attack in modern history. Well, that should concern us. I wonder who's up to what. But most people, I think, have a distorted view of, this whole issue of terrorism and what to do in our foreign policy. So you did see this. It's written by a British writer. Is that correct?
Yes, Felicity Arbuthnot, originally published in the Global Research, but with permission we put it up on the Institute's website as well.
And her whole thrust of this was that 13 years ago, the start of the war, the commencement of the, the invasion and the bombing was our doing. And she described that, of course, as a terrorist attack. And I think if you were on the receiving end of those bombs, I don't think it's a stretch to talk about it being a terrorist attack, because it's very, very frightening, especially since, to the knowledge of all the Iraqis who are on the receiving end of this, they can't remember when they were really threatening us. But remember, when we were there trying to stop this from going on, we had all the buildup, and it was not just 6 months, it was only literally years to build up the momentum for this, and they had to really scare the American people. But once again, prior to that, as you recall, I'm sure, there was a lot of propaganda about, weapons of mass destruction, the whole thing, and a lot of lies told.
A lot of lies told, and both leaders, Tony Blair and George Bush, most likely knew that they were lies at the time. But Felicity in her piece quotes several things from Tony Blair's speech to the British people on why the UK was joining in. And some of it is just so utterly absurd and disgusting. Here's a little tidbit. Explaining the justification for attacking Iraq. These tyrannical states do not care for the sanctity of human life, is what he said. And they went on to, according to the Watson Institute at Brown, as of 2013, the direct result of the attack on Iraq has been 165,000 deaths. So 165,000 people, that's a lot of 9/11s.
Yes, and she dates this 13 years to the day, I think March 20th, when the literal invasion and the bombing started. But it took a lot of events to build up to this, and she also talks about the sanctions, how important the sanctions were to the destruction and setting the stage for this really, really bad event, which is still ongoing. And she makes this point as well. It started then. But I want to read, you talk about Tony Blair supporting this, and he was a lapdog if there ever was one. And there certainly wasn't much resistance in the media. But we had a visitor, Netanyahu, came to the U.S. Congress to give a little speech in 2002, because there was still a lot of debate going up and agitating. But this is what Netanyahu said. He made a prediction, and he didn't do too well. Quote, "If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. The task and the great opportunity and challenge is not merely to affect the ouster of the regime, but also to transform the region." Well, I guess we can give him credit. He and others participated in transforming that region, there's no doubt.
It's transformed from a secular authoritarian type of government to terrorism spread everywhere, states destroyed. And it might be his idea that they can triumph if they create chaos all around them. But that seems like an awfully big gamble.
Yeah, but I keep wondering, where are their thoughts? If our tragedy of our foreign policy is a lot of our own doing, why don't the American people, wake up? But what about even from Israel's viewpoint? You know, if they, matter of fact, I probably expressed my opinion that this won't be good for Israel on the long run. And right now, I think they're in a more precarious position because you have Shia government, so-called government, and chaos in Iraq. And Saddam Hussein was not about to attack Israel. So it wasn't going to happen. And he was sort of holding a check on the Iranians now. So I don't see how there was any benefit, and I think it was predictable that there would be no benefits for Israel by us doing this.
It almost undermines the right wing in Israel's claims that Iran and the Shia in general are the greatest threats to Israel. Because here, as you point out, they've triumphed. They've gotten positions of power in Iraq, and they've not tried to attack Israel since then. So the rise of Shia power in the Middle East has not threatened Israel more than beforehand. So maybe they were lying about that too.
Well, you know, it's amazing how we can shift. Saddam Hussein has not always been our enemy, you know, and you know, in the 80s, there was a war going on once again, between Iraq and Iran, which was a pretty vicious war, but we were taking sides on that. We took sides of our friend, Saddam Hussein. So there was every reason in the world for Saddam Hussein to get to the point where, well, we have this fight with Kuwait. They've been you know, drilling and into the Iranian oil, so it was said. So they were sort of encouraged. Matter of fact, they even talked to our ambassador. She said, "Oh, well, okay, we don't deal with border disputes." So in a way, and then all of a sudden, he was turned into a pariah after all those years, and we even helped him get a nuclear reactor a while back.
And also, so many lies around that too. Another one was the lie that the Iraqi military was massing on the border of Saudi Arabia. That was just another excuse to get the '91 war started, just like we saw here. But here's another Blair quote, and I just, maybe it's just personal, I have such animosity towards someone like Blair who gets so rich off of the death and misery of so many more. But talk about a distorted view. He said, removing Saddam will be a blessing to the Iraqi people. A blessing. You know, the second Lancet study in 2006 found that there have been, this is as of 2006, so you've got to pump it up a bit, 650,000 excess deaths as a result of the attack. Almost 1 million people. That doesn't sound like a blessing to me.
Well, you know, the motivation had or a lot to do with Saudi Arabia. Even though they technically weren't ready to go into Saudi Arabia, it was good propaganda, and people, you know, at that time, everybody was worrying about peak oil. We'd never survive unless we don't continue our partnership with the Saudis, so they provide our oil and we provide their defense. So we were, you know, quite willing to go into there. At the same time, we've remained that way. And, you know, they worry about radical Islam. Well, there are some radicals, and probably, you know, when it comes to Sharia law, I imagine Saudi is the most proponent of Sharia law, and yet we're their best friends, and now we're friends with them and fighting a war. At the same time, you know, they're still using this propaganda of the reasons why we have to go to ISIS, and they never ask the question, how did ISIS come about?
Yeah. You know, when we were trying to put together this episode, we found two articles that went so well together, and one was Felicity's piece, and the other is by our old friend Glenn Greenwald, who was on a very similar or complementary issue, I would say, and that's the issue of media coverage and perception in the so-called West of terrorist attacks. And he pointed out just a week ago, the U.S.-supported Saudi fighter jets bombed a marketplace in Yemen. It killed 120 people, including at least 20 children. But, you know, they didn't light up the Eiffel Tower in the colors of Yemen. They didn't, people didn't put their Facebook pages. No, it's just completely ignored because there are victims and there are victims. Of course, it's horrible what happened in Brussels, but the comparison of the two, and so many like that, and this lack of interest in the media is really telling.
I can understand it to a degree. I mean, nobody likes to criticize their own government. We should be able to criticize our government maybe we should protect our country and talk about the people themselves. But no, it's not good. And if you do, you get accused of all sorts of things. You're unpatriotic and these sorts of things. But, you know, in that piece of Glenn, he tells a story about a commentator, a reporter for MSNBC. And her name was Ashley Banfield. And she came out shortly after the bombing started. And she says, it's not being fair. She gave a speech. Didn't do it on the television, but she gave a speech saying, well, you ought to report this too. And it was way too much. You would think that you could understand this if Fox, because they're considered more hawkish. But this is MSNBC. They're not supposed to be. So she was fired rather quickly after this. So it may be a sensitivity. We don't want to look like we're criticizing our own government. We have to stand together, you know, at a time of war and not oppose what the government do. You can't criticize the government at all. But at the same time, it's pretty clear that the propaganda machine is out there. And I saw that machine working that year before. Matter of fact, it was even more than 1 year of trying to calm down the politicians in Washington so we didn't think we had to invade Iraq.
Yeah, and Ashley Banfield wasn't the only victim of trying to look at it in a more nuanced way. I remember Pat Buchanan and Bill Press had a show on MSNBC, and they were very critical of the war. They did not last very long. They were fired. And Phil Donahue, which is a well-known case, was very critical of the war when it started. And there was an internal memo in MSNBC, again, the left channel where he worked. It said, quote, Phil Donahue will be a difficult public face for NBC at the time of war. Yeah. So he was fired.
Get rid of the messenger. Don't listen to the truth. But you know, the sanctions certainly were very, very harmful. And the famous interview with Madeleine Albright when she was asked about, you know, the sanctions are pretty rough on the Iraqis, the bombing and the killing and the destruction of the infrastructure and difficulty getting food and medicine for the children, that it was estimated 500,000 Iraqi children died. And Albright, you know, said, well, that sort of like, that's the price you have to pay, you know, to create this wonderful paradise, you know, in Iraq. And then you wonder, what if you were on the receiving end of this? What if you were an Iraqi family, and not just a Muslim family, anybody who lives over there that had lived together, all of a sudden they hear this stuff, and it just, you know, will infuriate them, you know, that's the way they were taught. And then people wonder why they would become radicalized, and that there might not be, you know, a percentage, and a certain percentage will say that the only thing left is violence. And of course, this is when suicide terrorism became much more popular, still exists, because it's out of desperation. It's sad that even a conversation like we're having, I don't think MSNBC is going to call us up and say that we're going to be giving our program on MSNBC, you know, to explain what's really going on. But the American people, and you can hear it, you know, in the campaign, how many people are suggesting that there's a blowback problem, and they still believe they're coming to get us because we're prosperous and we love liberty. So that's not quite true.
Well, Glenn Greenwald, directly and indirectly, makes a very good point that the media did not report at the time, and still doesn't report, the fact that U.S. attacks on places like Iraq and Pakistan and elsewhere, they generate such an enormous level of hatred that people become absolutely dedicated, whether they die themselves, to inflict pain on the power that did this to them, that destroyed their country. But Glenn points out, I think this is really interesting, there's a huge danger in the Americans never knowing that the things their government are doing are making them less safe, much more vulnerable. Because, you know, the government, as you say, the propaganda, oh, it's just because we're good, just because we're good. But the media purposely suppresses and does the bidding of the government in preventing us from understanding how upset the rest of the world is from this foreign policy of Washington's.
You mentioned money when it came to Blair. And I think there's money involved in this too. We always have to have an enemy, and of course communism fitted it pretty well, and it was a formidable enemy. But right now, you know, we have to have an enemy. We have to have reason to build more weapons. And what Canada right now is talking about, cuts in the military. Everybody's now still saying we have to rebuild the military because they're coming to get us. They're coming to get us. And the number of people who have died from terrorism within this country, fortunately, has been very, very small. And quite frankly, I think that if we had not been involved in the Middle East, you would have never heard of ISIS and Al Qaeda. They would have existed, but they would have been so small. But everything we do is, it gives them an incentive to even build on a bigger antagonism toward the United States. So I think that this whole idea, remember just last week, we killed the number 2 guy on Al Qaeda. And somebody commented in the paper for the 3rd time. Yeah. But what if you actually did have it, and you have the number 2 guy? Probably what really happens is because of the situation that we're in, us against them, is they would probably make him a martyr. Yeah. And they might get 1,000 more volunteers. They might create 1,000 more. Because every time these people that are being killed, and there are many that are fighting and trying to kill us, but there's obviously a lot, thousands being killed, and that would make a family awful man. And I would say that most of them are very peaceful about it. I mean, they don't decide they're going to commit suicide over it, but there's always going to be some that will do it, and I think that's where the real tragedy is. But I think the propaganda machine is the biggest problem that we face today in trying to get the truth out to people.
Yeah, exactly. And here's one for a little bit of closing irony. We talk about March 20th, and it's a day that people should remember. People that supported this war should be made to wear ashes and sackcloth or something. But just this March 20th was the day of all dates that President Obama announced that he's sending Marines back into Iraq.
Oh, no, I wonder if that was, it was probably accidental. It seems so silly to have picked that, but it's so ironic. Yeah. Is the war about over? Has the Middle East been remade? So yes, we're right back to square one. We've been looking for a war over there for a long time, and it's been perpetual. I mean, after it was Iraq, and then it was Syria, and then it's Libya, and then it's Afghanistan, it's Ukraine. It's perpetual, and tragically, I am pessimistic to think that this message that we have of peace and prosperity is not likely to overwhelm, in this election certainly, or overwhelm the American people so that they demand a change in foreign policy. But I tell you what, it's coming to an end. The finances are on our side, momentum is on our side, because all nations who claim to be an empire based on their goodness, and they want to spread their goodness and take care of the people around the world, they all fail. And they all fail many times, and most of the time it's because they run out of money and they run out of wealth, and we are consuming our wealth in our foreign policy and our foreign adventurism, and this is the reason that so many people are suffering. Unfortunately, the fear and the anger and how upset the American people are today aren't relating it to foreign policy as a major contributing factor. But when this country's actual bankruptcy is declared and the dollar crashes, believe me, we will be bringing our troops home just like the Soviets had to bring their troops home. So some good will come of it once this whole thing is concluded and it fails. It's failing now, and every year it gets worse, and yet so often right now it's still more, send more bombs and kill more people, and that's going to solve the problem. No, we need to change our foreign policy. We need to change it to non-intervention. We need to seek peace and prosperity. It's possible by just changing a few ideas, and that is a goal, of course, the Institute for Peace and Prosperity has, and we're going to continue working on that issue. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.